I don't know if we could start off. Maybe Jason, you could kind of like just explain your sort of title, your position. I know that when we were chatting on Instagram just now, you described yourself as an engineer, mad scientist. I mean, that's pretty close to it, isn't it?
Well, who called me mad? Oh, Emmett Brown called me a mad scientist long ago. He's like, "You're a mad scientist." I'm like, "Well, I'm not angry, but sometimes I am, I guess." But yeah, all right. So now I've given in. I've succumbed to the label, I guess. I got the hair for it usually sometimes. Um, but yeah, so I am Jason Lane. I'm the owner of Pictoriographica slash lead technician slash janitor. Um, my background is in engineering. I'm a lens designer by profession. That's my day job. This is a hobby turned side business, making dry plates and the dry plate accessories and stuff. So
Okay, so I mean, my sort of starting point with this is doing a project about my. It turns out it's like my friend's great granddad, who was a photographer from the late 19th century through to the middle of the 20th century, who shot almost exclusively, I think, actually exclusively with dry plates.
right.
And I'm going to be doing some work around that. So
Yeah,
I
that's
wanted
awesome.
to I wanted to ask you how you got into it. What was your starting point with dry plates?
So I've got to back up a little further because when I first started my career in optical engineering, this was 2000, and what so 2000 was right before the digital revolution sort of came about, and in that time frame, when the Canon Digital Rebel came out, and so all these new imaging arrays that made that possible were being introduced to the market. I was tasked by my boss to go buy a bunch and characterize them. And I had been considering getting a Digital Rebel just to continue, as I got into my photography hobby. But doing all that characterization made me sick of digital imaging, even before the digital revolution. So I didn't want to be doing that at work and then have to come home and do that. So I stuck shooting film, and I shot film for years and years. And got into dry plates, I think because I, uh, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. And I think the way it worked out was I had seen some info on shooting wet plate and tin types. And I thought, well, that's kind of a cool look. That's kind of neat. As an engineer, I like the tinkering part of it and getting into the technicals and the process, as well as the creativity side. But with the kids in the house, I was worried about the chemicals, and dry plate seemed like a good. I could still get like the wet plate tin type look, but all the chemicals would be, you just need that stuff when you're making the emulsion, and then after you've made the plate and it's dried and all that good stuff, then the rest of it is similar to shooting regular film. So I figured that was an easier approach. I had all the stuff that's needed to control the temperatures and go through the process. And so I put a batch of emulsion together, coated some plates, and they look like shit. And I was like, well, I've got to fix it. I'm an engineer. I've got to fix it. And then I got pulled in like that. And then, so that's how it started. That was probably about 2015, 2016. And so I shot plates for a couple of years for my own use. End of 2017, during Christmas vacation, I had 3 boxes of plates. But right as vacation would start, it was getting busy with work, and I had 3 boxes of plates that I didn't think I was going to get to. So I put them up for sale on Fotrio, and they sold in like 15 minutes. And then I had people asking if I could make more. They were like, "Oh, I missed this. I wanted to try them. Can you make more? Can you make different sizes?" And sort of I stumbled into selling them because there was interest and ongoing interest. So it just sort of went from there.
So there was no
So
great plan at the start of this. It was kind of you were doing something for yourself, and by chance you thought I'll just sell something, and then people showed an interest and you kind of took it forward.
Yeah, there was no grand strategy. Of course, that's changed as the business has become, I won't say viable, but as it goes on, there were a few things that I did at first, some basic things. Like I had a philosophy of I want to try to make them as cheap as possible. So a box of plates, I tried to set it reasonable to do things. One, cover my costs, of course, because I'm like anybody else, I'm not independently wealthy, and also try to set the price so that it could stay at the same price for as long as it possibly could. Because in that time frame, just like now, Kodak and Ilford and all those were continuing to raise their prices, and I'm like, that doesn't sit well. Nobody likes that, so I'll just set a price which is reasonable. It's similar to the cost of a box of Kodak color film, which I don't know if it's reasonable or not. I'll avoid that debate. But anyways,
that's not for you to decide, is it? That's for the consumer to decide, right?
Right. And a couple other business philosophies, like just being available and all that good stuff. And then that was it. And then as things have grown, it's like, okay, well, there's still a lot of room to tinker. If I'm going after reintroducing historic processes that have gone obsolete and are no longer available, what are the opportunities there? Not for myself, but for other folks. What would other people be interested in? So that resulted in the orthochromatic 25 plates, and then now the next thing that I'm working on are the black glass ambrotypes, which I'm sure you've seen. And I can talk about those, but and then like any good engineer, I have a roadmap, so I've got things down the road, and like I said, as it became viable, I'm like, I wonder if I could. I'll never be able to quit my day job making tri plates, but maybe I can use it as a springboard for doing so. So I'm not working two jobs, essentially. And the other thing that I've added to my sort of foundational philosophies is providing interesting jobs for local teenagers, like local high schoolers. So typically, if you're a teenager, you'll get a job at McDonald's flipping burgers, which some people like that, I guess. I don't think. Anyway, so I've got some high schoolers that work for me. That's from what I understand, that hiring teenagers is different in the U.S. versus in the U.K. So I've got some teenagers working for me. One girl who's the daughter of some of our neighbors. She started working for me when she was 14. She's 17 now. She's coated tens of thousands of plates. So chances are the plate that you shot was coated by her while she was singing her head off to whatever techno rave that she hooks up to the Bluetooth speaker down in the dark room.
So she's not a Maiden fan like you.
No. Well, she's getting there. I
thought it may be a prerequisite, but apparently not then.
Yeah.
So you've touched there on the fact that she's coated tens of thousands or 10,000 plates, and one of the questions that I did have in mind was, how many plates have you done? Because they come with batch numbers on, don't they? And I know that each batch has perhaps a slightly different characteristic or a slightly different chemical makeup, because that's just how it is. Could you maybe go into how many you've done and what the difference between batches would be?
Well, the batches speak to the emulsion batch, like you said. One of the challenges that I had to overcome when I scaled up was trying to get batch to batch consistency. Now as things go along, I've got to address issues that may come up. I had a couple batches that were a little slow, and I had to figure out what was going on there. But aside from that troubleshooting, I try to have a repeatable process, and I think it's successful for the most part. There are variations, and when I'm not being lazy, I'll characterize. I'll do a test plate that allows me to generate the characteristic curve for that batch. But as far as total count, I was thinking about this the other day. I think at some point over the past month, we passed 50,000 plates coded and sent out.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, it's crazy. So you can imagine why I had to get some help.
Right, but also just going back to the whole thing of like it wasn't even really an idea, it was a leftover, you were doing it for yourself, some sold, you kind of thought, oh, I could maybe try and do something with this. And typically...
It was very spontaneous.
Right. I mean, typically the 4x5 plates sell in packs of 10.
Yes.
Would that be a similar amount for the many other sizes that you make? Because I'm just kind of thinking, that's a lot of packs of dry plates, a lot of packs.
Yeah, it is. So, yeah, so for the smaller sizes, it's packs of 10. And starting with, as you go up in size, starting with whole plate, I think I break it out into packs of 5. And that's entirely to get a good price point. Because if you come along, you know, and the cost curve's the same. So it scales up, except that the really small sizes where I have to cover the labor. But for the most part, they scale. So a pack of, say, 10 8x10 plates would cost $160. And I was like, well, that's a lot of money for somebody to shell out if they're buying these for the first time and wanted to try them.
Sure, yeah.
So I split them up into packs of 5. So 5 8x10s is $80, which is, you know, just scales directly from the cost of like 4x5s. If you think about like surface area. And so I just try to keep the price reasonable so people don't buy. And if they want more, obviously they just order more boxes.
I saw some discussion on the Facebook group, which is pretty much your Facebook group, but it's not your Facebook group about you. It's your Facebook group because you set it up and it's just about shooting dry plates.
It's mostly so I can live vicariously through other people's photography, because I don't get a chance to shoot much. And there's way more better photographers than me.
Well, that seems like a reasonable thing to do. There was some discussion there yesterday about some people shooting what I think were probably like 35mm microscope plates that you'd made. So you literally go from almost the smallest formats past 8x10, or how big do you actually go?
So the largest that I've coated is 16 by 20s, 16 inch by 20 inch plates, and some of those sent out. The last set of those went out to a guy who wants to test them before he asks for like something insane like 28 inch by 36 inch plates, which is for a project, and which is awesome. Yeah. And I'm still trying to figure out how I'll do that. But the process will scale, and it's just a matter of, you know, how I would, once the gelatin sets up and it's got to dry, it's got to do that in the dark. So how do I make sure that it doesn't get exposed? So it's just dealing with that size. But the smallest I've coated is, I want to say I coated those microscope slides for Gerald Figo. I'm sure I butchered his name. I apologize. That he could drop into 35mm cameras, and I've coated 35mm plates for myself. One of my other hobbies is astrophotography, so putting a camera on the back of a telescope. And so I've, on a whim, you know, I've coated plates to do that and take pictures of the moon and nebula and stuff. That's sort of an ongoing.
So can we just take a slight detour then? And as you've sort of brought up the astrophotography, can you tell us what's been going on with this massive, like I imagine quite a big telescope at an observatory? Because there was something really cool with that a couple of weeks back, right?
Oh yeah, this thing, I nerded out so bad on that, Robin. It's like, it hit like 3 of my top 5 interests in the world. So, Blake Estes at Mount Wilson Observatory stopped into, he's a film shooter, and he's a telescope operator up there. He stopped in at Freestyle Photo because they had recently moved. He said that he was checking out the new digs, and he was wandering through the store, the retail store, and saw a display of my dry plates there, dry plates and the plate holders and stuff that they sell. And he was like, he got all excited. I guess apparently they must have been talking about the fact that they can't get dry plates for telescopes anymore.
I mean, because that's an everyday conversation, I'm sure. But okay.
Well, there it is, because
it is.
historically, at the professional observatories, all the astronomy in most of the 20th century was shot on dry plates, and the reason they did that was because they needed a flat imaging media, so that they didn't have to worry about flexure in like film messing up the really exacting detailed measurements between stars and celestial objects that they have to do.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they actually went to, and this was universal. There are some exceptions. I'm sure they shot film sometimes, but most of them went directly from shooting dry plates to digital cameras on the back, like in the 1980s and 1990s.
Right.
But anyway, so he had all that on his mind. The fact that so Mount Wilson Observatory does public outreach. One of the things they like to do is try to replicate how they were using it in the past. Obviously, a big use was shooting dry plates, but he didn't realize that he could make. Anyways, he saw the display and he got all excited. He's like, "Is this like are these like old plates, or is this like just a historical display?" And he said the clerk was like, "No, these are new dry plates that you can buy." And he's like, "What?" So he bought a bunch, drove up to the observatory, showed them to the director, who got all excited, and they put together this plan to pull out all the old equipment. And by that, I mean the actual equipment that astronomers like Edwin Hubble used in the early 20th century to do groundbreaking research. Pulled parts out of the museum, dusted them off, bolted it up to the back of their 60-inch telescope, which was the one that was installed in 1907, and shot some really nice pictures of the moon on 8x10. Now I need to remind him, he promised to send me a couple of plates, a couple of examples, which I'm going to cherish, I guess.
I mean,
yeah, it was exciting.
Wow.
I was trying to figure out a way to say, hey, if you guys are going to make this a thing for public outreach, I would be happy to come out and help you with the details of shooting the plates, and doing the process. Try to get
very generous of you.
They might have gotten on to me, but
anyway, maybe, but
they're busy. They are busy right now preparing the telescope, preparing it to open up to the public again after COVID.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But anyways, yeah, that was really exciting.
I mean, that's just crazy, isn't it? That's so cool. Let's take a step back then to the actual process of making the dry plates. Here's what I know. There's a piece of glass, which you either cut to size or comes as size, but you have some glass and you have some liquid emulsion. Now, many of us who've been involved with darkroom photography and traditional analog photography over the years might have bought some of these emulsion kits from various suppliers and maybe coated it onto coated your own paper can be a thing, or maybe not with the emulsions, but I've certainly remember doing something on wood before.
Yeah,
that's where I'm kind of thinking this process is kind of that, but more so. So could you talk us through that, please?
So yeah, this process is kind of like that, but more so. I love how you put that. That's great. The kits that you buy are in general, they're silver chloride emulsions, so they see primarily UV. They're a thicker emulsion because they're put together to coat things like paper and wood. For coating glass, and I bought these kits and I never had good luck with them because in my opinion, for coating glass, they're awfully thick. Like they set up very quickly and they're hard to work with.
I remember them being quite latexy or something, almost rubbery. Is that correct remembrance?
Yeah, they are. I mean, the kits, the gelatin, gelatin is just like Jello. So if you ever had Jello, once it sets up, it's jiggly like that. Same thing, except there's more gelatin in it, so it sets up tougher, more resilient, and at room temperature instead of just in the fridge.
Sure.
So yeah, like you said, what I do is I start with a piece of glass. Most of the sizes are pre-cut at the factory. I've got a supplier in the U.S. that we've worked out a price that makes that viable. they're pre-cut. Most of them are pre-notched. So I get those in. The first thing I do is I clean them. I've got a cleaning process to get rid of any residual. Not necessarily from the factory, because they glass makers will wash them and stuff before they pack them. But to get anything off, and then I actually prep them with a what I call a subbing solution, which is a thin gelatin chromalin solution that I dip them in. That helps with adhesion of the emulsion, not necessarily for for myself using it, but for other people in different parts of the world. So that was an example of a problem that I had to figure out when it went from just me using my plates and controlling my own process to other people using them. Because, photographers are really good at following instructions.
I was going to talk to you about that from the plate that I shot yesterday. Not so good at following instructions.
That's okay. You're not the only one, but that's fine. But to deal with that, there's things that I've had to change my process.
Sure.
So I sub them so that when I lay down the emulsion, when you go to develop it, an example of this would be like a customer in Singapore or Guam, whose tap water temperatures are like 30 Celsius or more. And so I do two things for that. One is add a subbing layer. Well, I clean and prep it, add a subbing layer so that the emulsion will stick to the glass really well, so you don't get frilling. And the other thing is I harden the emulsion, just like what Kodak and Ilford would do, except I limit myself to the chemicals that were available during the dry plate era, just to replicate, stay true to the idea of replicating these obsolete processes. And so that prevents that raises the melting point of the gelatin up to something crazy like 120 F, so that you can develop them in those. I still recommend that you sort of keep consistent temperatures, which is a good practice for even like shooting film and stuff. But in general, that keeps that keeps the emulsion stuck to the glass. So subbing layer, I'm getting sidetracked. I got the shirt that says I go off on a tangent. And it's a chart, it's math humor. But anyway, so I clean it, I prep it with the subbing layer. It gets put in the bin so that when Amelia comes down to coat, she can just pull the plates, whatever size we need. And I've got a workflow, sort of what needs to be stocked, what's on order, any custom plates, all that good stuff. And then she coats them, and she coats a bunch of them. They get, we have a coating process that she does, and then the gelatin sets up, and we rack them to dry. And I've got a drying box that they dry in, and then once they're dry, usually the next morning before I go to work, I'll pack them in, and that allows me to inspect them to make sure that they're good enough quality and all that good stuff. And then they get a label slapped on, and away they go. So chances are, just because during certain times of the year, it's really hard to keep them in inventory. Chances are, if you order a box of plates, they were probably coated a couple, 3 days prior. So
I was going to ask a question. When I come to my project, I've still got 7 plates from the first pack of 10 that I bought last summer, which, if I remember, are labeled, I don't know whether it's an O or a 0, but 015. So I guess they're probably a year or so old.
Yeah, that's O-15. Yeah. So right now I'm on O-30. So I've had 15 batches.
So the box that I got from Analogue Wonderland in the UK in the week, which was fresh inventory into them because they were out of stock.
Yeah.
I don't know what the number is on that, but that must have been sent out by you guys a couple of weeks ago, I guess, or however long your shipping takes. So will I see any difference between the 2 batches, or does your process kind of allow for the fact that there will be...
I think I keep notes on each batch. And like I said, when I'm not being lazy, I try to characterize it. O-15, I think, was a pretty good batch. And I think the ones you'll get, which will probably be like 27, should be very similar.
Okay.
Yeah. There might be some tweaking as it goes along, because because I'm often evaluating the plates when I shoot them. Go, oh, is the contrast good? You know, it's sort of a, and I won't talk about these things. I'll just put up the characteristic curves if there's a significant change. And by significant, I mean it. Maybe I needed to tweak it to add like a half stoppa or a third of stoppa speed. So it's just details. But fundamentally, they'll shoot the same. They should be fairly consistent. And that's one of the things that I try to do.
And you put an awful lot of technical data on that kind of thing on your website, don't you?
That's all
for the batches. Yeah.
That's all things that I've learned the hard way. Say, hey, watch for this, watch for this, watch for this. I've been there, done that.
So you did mention wet plates, and
yeah.
I know that when we were talking maybe a month or so back, when we were kind of looking at setting up this chat, we looked at how dry plates kind of originated from a photographer who was based just a few miles from where I live, maybe 3-4 miles away. And brilliantly, I've forgotten his name, but he was a doctor.
I don't remember either.
He was a photographer in Southampton, and he kind of got fed up with getting ill all the time from the chemicals from wet plates, and so he was instrumental in developing the dry plate. So, I mean, I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about, like, you know, the chemicals involved, the environmental concerns. Dry plate is certainly for the end user, from what you were saying, it's a much nicer process, but still at the production stage, it's still a fairly...
It's actually not bad. It's not as bad as you would think. So especially compared to wet plate, from what I understand. So I don't know much about wet plate because I never got into it. But the basic, so let's talk about the ASA2 plates, because that's the basic sort of 1880 time frame emulsion, which sort of was at the beginning of the dry plate era. The basic chemicals are just water, gelatin, the silver nitrate, potassium bromide, potassium iodide, and that's pretty much it. Oh, and the hardener, which is chromalum. But for making the emulsion, the hazardous one amongst those is the silver nitrate, because of the silver inside of it. So you don't want to eat silver because you'll turn purple. You know, and silver is a heavy metal, right? So you have to be careful about it. That's the one that I have to deal with from an environmental perspective primarily. You know, gelatin is an organic material that dissolves away. You know, bacteria love gelatin. Potassium bromide, potassium iodide are actually salts that come from the ocean.
Right. So they're renewable.
They're renewable. The silver is the one. So like if you go to a photo lab to get film developed, just like you want to deal with your spent fixture that's full of silver, you know, run it through a silver reclamation sort of piece of equipment. I do the same thing. So any unused gelatin emulsion that has the silver halides in it, I'll melt it down, dilute it so it stays melted, and mix it with fixture to pull the silver out, and then I run it through a reclamation process. The other thing to point out is that you know, I know I've coated a lot of plates, but even so, the volume isn't anything near compared to like Kodak and Ilford. So the things that I have to do to control, you know, environmental waste are different than what, you know, if I had to have the environmental controls that Kodak and Ilford have, that would be great, because that means that suddenly everybody's switched from using the iPhone to dry plates. And I've got a much bigger business. So when you scale, there's more things you have to worry about. So that's part of it. And I know that's not just that by itself isn't the right attitude. So I do keep track of chemicals, try not to waste. The chromalum is the other one. So chromium isn't harmful for humans, but it is harmful for fish if it gets in the ocean. And fortunately, the ocean is nowhere nearby. But I do manage waste and keep them down to very small amounts.
So I don't know who the regulator for all of those kind of things would be in the States, but what you're saying is you kind of hold yourself to a higher ideal, because of your own beliefs, your own choice,
I
voluntarily,
do.
you want to
Yeah.
aim higher.
Yeah, I do. It's the EPA in the U.S., the Environmental Protection Agency.
Yeah.
And they have recommendations and all that good stuff too, which I follow because they're smart guys. But yes, to your point, I try to hold myself to a higher standard because I did grow up in a rural area. I love the woods and the outdoors and stuff, and I want my kids to enjoy it just like I have.
Too right. I mean, I suppose one of the advantages of the dry plates is because again, you can kind of get into this whole thing of like, responsibility and sustainability. Anybody using film or chemicals or anything like that is using a sort of a different footprint in terms of that sort of thing compared to digital. However, digital has its own footprint, doesn't it? Because we have a much more sort of disposable equipment, which we don't tend to keep. And cloud storage is, I think I quoted to you when we were chatting the other day, a documentary that I'd heard which said that the cloud storage for Amazon, which is mainly their photo cloud storage, they've got a place, I was going to call it a factory, but that's not the right word, but it kind of feels like the right word. But they've got a cloud storage facility outside of Dublin, which uses as much electricity every day as Dublin does.
Yeah.
That seems kind of crazy. So
right.
While we don't have to consider that, I suppose we do have to consider glass, we have to consider like air miles, the chemicals, so there is a balancing process. But I mean, obviously these glass plates, in terms of their archival qualities, there's not going to come a time where suddenly, the hard drive is obsolete, because the glass is the glass, and that's never going to be obsolete, right?
Right. And there's a couple other points to make. I mean, I could talk about this for a long time because I have to deal with environmental stuff for my day job too. But to like on the front end of making digital imagers, there's a massive industry that uses a lot of harsh chemicals, has waste that they have to deal with just to make the chips before the camera gets into your hand. They're all made out of plastic and all that good stuff. I think for the other things that go into the plates, first of all, is when I ship stuff, I try to use renewable packaging materials. So like the starch peanuts instead of styrofoam peanuts.
Yeah.
The boxes that I ship, like the wooden plate drying holders in, I use like paper packing instead of like bubble wrap. I think the one place I still use bubble wrap, just because I have a huge roll of it, is if somebody orders a single box of 4x5 plates, I put them in these U.S. Post Office pre-sized, and I wrap it up in bubble wrap. And once I'm done with it, I'm going to switch to the paper.
Okay.
I figured at least I don't like using the bubble wrap because it's plastic, but as opposed to just throwing it away and switching over, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Right. I mean, if you've got it, you should use it until,
Yeah, and I try not to tape it up so that, if you order a box of plates and it's got bubble wrap, you could reuse it. So I try to be aware of stuff like that.
Yeah.
The glass itself, so like you said, it's got good archival quality. They'll be in your collection for years and years and years. If they eventually get tossed out, glass itself decomposes. The soda lime glass that I use, which is window glass, the soda and the lime will eventually leach out, and those are natural materials. And then all you're left with is silicate, which is sand. So from that perspective, it's much more, you have a sheet of glass laying out there, but eventually it will decompose. Whereas something like a plastic digital camera will be there for a lot longer.
Yeah, indeed. I wonder whether we could talk about the people who use your plates. So I'm one of them, you're one of them. So that's two people who can talk about it. But in general, when we see this community of people on the Facebook group and certainly on Instagram as well, it tends to be people who are, well, what's your experience of those people?
Well, first of all, I think we're all insane for using such a terribly difficult. No, I'm kidding. It's interesting. So and I've talked to this about people from time to time because they ask, who's buying your plates? Is it like older people who have shot film and stuff for a long time, and they're trying something new? Is it people that have traditionally done alternative process? I'm happy to say that it's very representative of, I think, people who shoot film in general. And there's all types. So there's older folks. There's a lot of younger folks who shoot it, like millennials and Gen Xers, like me. Honestly, I think it's primarily people who like to try something different.
Right, who are interested in the process.
Who are interested in the process, but also like the other. There's a lot of different ways to slice it. So there's people who come in from film photography who shoot, who like sort of walking back in time, and eventually you get to dry plates. There's also people who shoot wet plate, who come in from that perspective to say, oh, I can get a similar look. Let me try out this process, which might be nice to be easier. It's more of a point and shoot compared to shooting wet plates. I don't know. But it's all types. It really is. There's a lot of younger folks who are shooting it, people our age. There's a lot of older folks who have shot film forever, or maybe are coming back from digital and then trying all alternative processes to just try new things. So when you ask who's shooting them, I say all types. And I think that's pretty cool, because it provides it brings in a lot of variety. There are folks like me who may be technical people by day. Photography is a creative outlet.
Yeah. And
so those are the types that would like the process. I think photographers who come into it like a process that's a little bit different, but they like the look and the characteristics.
Yeah.
So it's all types, which is really neat. I think it's great.
I was looking up the other day about I was doing some shooting with some Tri-X and some D76, and I was just kind of like looking up for interest's sake, like when Tri-X was introduced and when D76 was introduced, and I was like, okay, this is cool, because this combination is kind of like maybe 70 years old, depending on exactly when they put it into 35mm film. What would be the kind of the length of time that dry plates with HC110? When was HC110 introduced? Because that's the developer that you recommend.
Yeah, HC110 was introduced in the 1960s, so there is some overlap, and that's where I break away from my use the things they had at the time. Just because I like HC110, it's sort of my favorite one. So obviously,
so Edward Mudge, the guy who I'm kind of like doing some rephotography with and working with his family, and perhaps some of the locations that he photographed in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 1920s, whatever, he wouldn't have been using HC110 because it didn't exist. He'd have been using
he'd be using something like D76. So HC110 essentially is the liquid version of D76. That's why Kodak made it. In general, so if you step back, the plates like to be developed in like a general purpose developer. So like D76, what is ID11, I think, is Ilford's version.
Yeah.
HC110 is a general purpose developer. The neat thing about those is a higher concentration. So like if you develop not just plates, but like film in like D76 stock, you get some solvent action in there, which the plates seem to really like.
Right.
And if you dilute it, that solvent action goes away, and it's still, you get really nice tones and all that good stuff. So HC110 is similar. The one, I guess, people have developed them in pyro. So during the dry plate era, it would have been like hydroquinone, metol type developers, like what D76 is. There was also pyro developers. Those were really common in the time, and people, it's not as common now, especially amongst film photographers, but people still use pyro to develop film and plates, and they have success with that. And then there's high accutance developers like Rodinal, which the plates definitely do not like.
Right. So would those be like the high accutants? Would that be like the old Barry Thornton formulas where he kind of worked with, was it Dizactol and Exactol? Would those be those type of developers?
Well, Rodinol is the one that people always ask about, and they say, what should I develop it, or can I develop these in Rodinol? I was like, you can if you throw out your Rodinol and get D76.
That's how to use your Rodinol. Throw it out.
I mean, you can develop it and you'll get a result, but the acetants sort of, it almost like it accentuates all the sort of the flaws and stuff down in the deep down in the shadows.
Interesting.
I won't call them flaws, but just the artifacts and stuff from the hand coding process, and it sort of highlights those. So it's like for people who are familiar with digital photography, it's like shooting your digital camera at like a really high ISO, like ISO 150,000, where you're going to get like a shit ton of noise. Pardon the French, but
I don't
or
think
my Navy, that's my Navy background coming through. But so it, and I don't think you need that acetants anyway, because it's such a fine grain emulsion. It's just an extremely fine grain emulsion. You're going to get the sharpness in the acetants, even with a general purpose developer. The others, it also likes fine grain developers like Microdol, and I think it's Perceptol is the Ilford equivalent.
Right.
So it does really well in those. You just lose some speed.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the very active general purpose developers is what it likes.
So I don't know if I can just kind of like talk you through what I did last night.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, we haven't had any sunshine. Like we had like the driest April, and then we had like the wettest May. So June started with some sunshine, and I'd know that shooting these plates on a sunnier day is perhaps easier than some other ways. So I'm using the speed plates. So they're 25 ASA in a Intrepid. I can't point backwards there.
Yeah, I see it. Nice camera.
Yes. So Intrepid Mark III, just with like a wide angle lens.
Right.
So I just used my mobile phone for a light meter because I'm waiting on one of the Kickstarter light meters to come. But anyway, that's not super relevant. So it was a quarter of a second, f16, 25 ASA or ISO, which is basically the same, but again, not the same. And let's not get into all that. So I kind of shot that yesterday during the daytime, and then waited till it was dark because I have to use my kitchen, and I haven't got any kind of blackout stuff. And this time of year, it's not really dark until like 11 p.m., like way after the sun's gone.
Yeah, it's similar here in New England too.
It's just kind of how it is. It's the right time of year to be shooting the stuff, but not the right time of year to be developing them if you haven't actually got a darkroom.
So shoot during the summer, develop in the winter.
Right, there we go. That's the answer for that one. Just wait like 6 months and then do all of your developing.
Yeah.
So I left my thermometer in the garage because I'm hopeless. So I just kind of like made mixed up some lukewarm tap water with the HC110 dilution B, which you recommend. So that's 1 part to 31. In the trays that I use, I reckon that like 320 mils, so about the size of a can of Coke. That kind of gives enough depth because the plates have a thickness to them, so you need more liquid than you would for a sheet of film because there's actual.
Yeah.
What is the depth of the plate?
So the plates are 1.3 millimeters thick.
Right. So you
nominally
need to be able to cover that.
Yeah.
So I reckon 10 mils of HC110 to 310 mils of variably temperatured water kind of gives the right effect. I've been trying to move away from using certain chemicals and taking chemicals out of the process if I can. So I was just using, more water as a stop bath. Is that a terrible idea with these plates, or is that okay? I mean, it seemed to have worked all right.
I think it's okay. My preference is for acid stop bath, which most of them they're either basically concentrated vinegar or citric acid. So
could I add some vinegar to the water, or am I just getting into a mishmash of like how would I know what dilution to use?
if you wanted to control what your chemicals are, I mean, I would get some citric acid, which you could get at the supermarket, and look up some recipes for citric acid stop bath. And I forget what the concentration is. It's, I don't know, 5 or 10% or something like that.
Okay,
but in any case,
to do it just that way, right?
Yep. The indicator stop baths add add a chemical that will change color as the pH changes, so you know when it's exhausted. But in any case, a water stop, I think that's fine.
Okay. So
I
then
know
I've been
that
using this Bellini fixer, which is again like a maybe like a slightly less harsh chemical makeup. They kind of recommend it for use in colleges and schools where people are not so kind of like safety conscious and all the rest of it. So I've been using that as a fixer because that's what I use.
Right.
And then you know your instructions on the back of the pack kind of list like if you're doing a if you're doing a pyro clear and if you're doing this and if you're doing that. I was like, I'm not sure what all of those things mean. So I'm going to leave it in my fixer for 10 minutes, which is twice as long as I maybe normally would, and hope that that's okay.
Yeah. So you can always, you say you do it in your kitchen. So I assume you have like a safe light so you can see it develop and fix out. So, and this applies to basically any film, I guess, if you could watch it, you know, you've got the clearing time, and that's the time it takes for the emulsion to go from opaque to clear. And you can watch that happen in the fixer. You double that clearing time and it's archivally fixed. And that's really all you have to do.
Okay, so that's a part of the process. Sorry, go on.
Well, it touches on how they used to do this back in the late 19th century. You're basically doing it exactly the way they did it.
Right.
Where you drop it in a tray typically in their kitchen at night after 11 p.m. Watching it develop. They used to develop by inspection. There was some recommended times that like Kodak would put out or Ilford would put out, but most folks would watch these plates develop out. And when it looked like it was done, and I can talk about what that means, they would pull it, put it in their stop bath, and then fix it, watch for it to clear, double that time, and then rinse. Now the developing by inspection, I tell this to people all the time. They go, can I develop it in such developer? I'm like, I don't know. I don't have Kodak's R&D budget. So I can't run down all these developers myself. I just don't have time. So what I do is say, I think it might be this amount of time just based on what it's similar to. And I say, but you can develop by inspection. If you've got a safe light in a dark room, and you got to be careful about your safe light, of course, fogging it out. But you can watch it develop. And what I tell them is that when it looks like it's too dark, wait until it looks like it's too dark and you're like, crap, I must have overdeveloped this. That's when it's ready to pull out. And that's key. And people who do prints know what I'm talking about, because you leave a print in the developer until it looks too dark. And that when you turn on the regular lights, it'll look good. For the plates, it'll look like it's too dark, but when it goes from opaque to clear, and this is hard to describe, but when the emulsion's opaque, the light that's coming from your safe light goes through the silver, so some of it gets blocked out, and then bounces off the opaque emulsion back into your eyes. So it goes through the silver twice. So it looks like it's a stop more overdeveloped than what it actually is. When it goes clear and you're looking at it, then the light's only going through once. So the silver's only blocking half the light when you're looking in transmission as in versus reflection. So you leave it in the developer until it looks overexposed.
Yeah.
Until you think it's overexposed. If you pull it when you say, oh, that looks good, then it's going to be thin.
Right.
So that's sort of the guiding thing. And that's exactly how they used to do it in the 19th century. There's nothing new. So if you do have a developer that you'd like, you don't have to buy HC 110. You just have to develop by inspection and then take notes, which we could all be better at taking notes, I think.
And then it just comes down to experience. And if you haven't got the experience yourself, you ask somebody who does. You find a group online or
exactly.
I know that you're very open as the guy who's behind all of this, that you kind of constantly kind of fielding questions from people who are working in a similar way on their own things or are using your products, and you're just very happy to kind of talk about the process.
I'm always in boring meetings trying to find an excuse to get distracted. So I'm usually pretty good at answering questions through social media.
Yeah.
I did sort of compile every all my harder, everything that I learned from doing things the wrong way, and put that together on a page on the website. So I usually, if people ask questions, I like answering myself, but sometimes it's hard to when I'm sitting in a meeting on my phone. So I say, go check out the website, read through there. I think the answer to your question is there.
Everything I've ever done wrong so far.
Yeah, and I try to couch it in those terms so they don't feel like I'm blowing them off, because I'm not. I'm just, sometimes it gets hard to type.
So with regard to the fixer, I actually used the darkest of my trays for the fixer and had it in the darkest place. So I need to rethink that next time, because part of the fixing process actually is going to have to be being able to make a judgment on, because it does completely change, doesn't it? I remember from doing this last year, I didn't notice it so much last night, but from doing it last year, that the plates do change, don't they? In the fix, it really does become.
It does clear out. That's where the term clearing time came from. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together until I was actually watching the plates clear out, going,
sure.
Clearing time. Oh, that's what that means. It's sort of one of those dumb moments, but you're like, ooh, a light just went off.
Piece of the jigsaw puzzle gets kind of put into place. It should have been there all the time. But yeah.
I'll tell you one thing about shooting plates is they're, I won't say they're temperamental, but if you make an error, which modern film may be forgiving about,
right,
the plates will let you know that you screwed up. That's for sure. And so I think for somebody coming in from the film photography side, like it sounds like you have and I did, it really ups your game on the technical side of photography, because you have to be aware of terms like that clearing time, developing by inspection if you use a new developer, and be able to judge what's going on. And then also, when you're shooting the plates and metering for them, since they're not panchromatic, there's differences between what the plates see and what your meter sees. And so you have to be aware of the environment and what the atmosphere is doing, the time of year, time of day. This is all stuff that they had to worry about in the 19th century, which technological advances during the 20th century sort of overcame that I can't take advantage of. So,
but I remember reading on your website that a great way to learn more about the process is to kind of go and look at the photographic journals from the turn of the previous century, when they were working through all of this stuff, and read about, people actually getting to grips with those problems.
Yeah, and those are entertaining to read, because you'll see exchanges between people who may be having an argument, and it looks just like a Facebook thread,
right?
Except the back and forth doesn't take place in minutes; it takes place over weeks. But it's great. It's like who's a guy named Eder and Vogel, when Vogel first discovered that erythrocin was an orthochromatic. When they first discovered the sensitizing dyes to see more of the spectrum, those guys got into it, and you could go read in the journals where they were just nitpicking at each other. It's like, God, this sounds like, amazingly, humans have not changed over the past 100 years.
Yeah, so many things do.
Great, it's entertaining to read through them. It's like, oh, this is just like Facebook.
So human nature doesn't change even when everything else around it kind of does change.
Yeah, apparently not.
Yeah. I just wonder whether I can just do a quick screen share of an image that I've actually. I know you've kind of seen it very briefly, but this is the plate that I shot yesterday. Now, in terms of scanning it, I'm kind of quite a big fan of Pixelator at the moment, because just it's convenient for anything from large format down to 35mm, but because of the thickness of the plates, it is not really a workable solution for this, just because you can't sandwich it all together. The plate is obviously a lot, I don't know,
Pixelator is
a piece of film, right?
Yeah, Pixelator is made for film, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it just can't do this. But I sort of took the same idea effectively to digitizing, which is to use, they supply it with a frosted piece of plastic, which is going to act as a diffuser just on an LED light panel, and then effectively shooting it with a DSLR over the top. This is a
really good plate.
Well, thanks. I mean,
nice picture, by the way.
Well done for making really good plates, because with the whole process kind of starts with you. So obviously I've done that. I've sort of scanned it. I've put it into Lightroom. There's like a before and after kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I took it. I think I took this particular one as a kind of just a refamiliarization of the whole process for myself. And I chose somewhere with some pretty dark shadows and some pretty bright highlights, and kind of plonked my mum kind of like in the middle of it at kind of noon, pretty much. So I just wondered whether we could just talk about how sort of typical this would be of the kind of the look that the plates give. And then there was a couple of like artifacts, which I think might be, well, you can probably explain better than I can, but I think they might be some residual emulsion on the reverse of the plate. But yeah, maybe you can just kind of talk to the tonal characteristics.
Right. So this is a great plate. So for showing off what these plates will look like. So first thing I noticed is it's very contrasty. You can see in the positive that the whites, especially on her shirt, are washed out, and the shadows are really dark. And I think this speaks to the dynamic range of the emulsion itself, which if you're scanning it with a pixelator using a camera, I think you start running into limits of the dynamic range of the camera, which is, but aside from that, the sky up in the corner is washed out because there's a lot of ultraviolet, obviously, when the sun's out. And so you always see this in periodic plates and in these plates. Yeah. Over the porch behind your neighbor's house, you can see it's got kind of a glow around the very bright, and that's halation of the plates. So I don't add an anti-halation layer because I love that look.
Right.
And you see that in plates from the 1880s, 1890s, before they started adding an anti-halation layer to cut that. So that's sort of a typical glow. And then it's hard to see. There's some detail in the shadows. Yeah. And like I said, you may be running into limits of the dynamic range of your digital imager. But one of the things that I point out to people is that I designed the emulsion to have a really long toe on the characteristic curve.
Right.
Because often, especially people who are used to shooting film, they tend to underexpose it for various reasons. And so I designed it to have a long toe. So even if it's underexposed by a stop or so, you can still pull out details in a scan.
How do you digitize?
I don't think
so what do you use to digitize? What's the kind of the pro approach for that?
Well, not a pro, but I use a Epson V750, so a flatbed scanner. They have, I think, the 750s and probably the 850s. I don't know about the earlier ones, but they have at least a dynamic range of 4 to 4.5 or something like that. Gamma, I guess. I'm not sure of the term. It seems to be able to scan in the dynamic range, even with a well-balanced histogram. It captures all the info. The plates in general for exposing, I always tell people to err on the side of overexposure,
right? Because
a lot like film, except more so. I'm going to use your term. The plates can accommodate like maybe one stop underexposure, but on the overexposure side, it's at least three stops of latitude. So I usually tell people to just compensate. Don't worry about overexposing. Try to be careful on underexposing, and that gets into trickiness of metering properly. For example, and it doesn't look like you had a problem here at all. It looks great, but if you're taking a picture of something which has a lot of vegetation in it, so a lot of green colored lights, the ASA2 plates are going to struggle because it doesn't see green.
Right.
And so your meter sees it fine and says, exposed for 1 second. Well, you may want to just add a stop or meter off a gray card. I usually do it just right in front of the camera to see what the natural lighting is. And the gray card metering off that may say, okay, you need 2 seconds exposure or whatever.
So would that be the same for the speed plates then, for the 25 ASA plates? Would that be the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. They've got a little bit more freedom because they do start seeing to the green, but the response there is still drops down quite a bit compared to what these guys see in the UV.
So part of the process of making the two different emulsions is that chemically they are different, which is why they have a different speed, right?
Right. They're related, but the orthochromatic plates the orthochromatic emulsion has, the sensitizing dye, which is erythrocin, which is FD&C number 3, red food coloring dye. But that was the original dye that Vogel found sensitized it. So I use that. But it also has additional chemicals for increasing the speed and making it more sensitive. But yeah, the ortho plates seem to be a little bit more forgiving, I think, for metering, just because it's not wholly dependent on the UV, and actually adding the red dye to get it more sensitive to green and yellow and stuff kind of pushes down the UV response. So to kick up the speed, I have to push the whole spectral sensitivity curve up. I'm geeking out on you, but yeah, in general, the net result is that I think the ortho plates are a little bit more forgiving, but when in doubt, err on the side of a stop exposure.
Okay.
Overexposure.
I just wonder whether we could I know that, again, we're not necessarily going to see it so well on here, but I just felt like part of your instructions on the back of the thing are to do with if there's any undissolved, I suppose, emulsion on the reverse of the plate. Obviously, you can use some kind of product to get it off. And there's just this this feels like it is on the reverse. It feels like there's kind of something. I know it's not going to sort of show up so well there for you, but
no, I see it.
Can you just tell about that process and what that is and how to deal with it?
This is one of the artifacts that tells you that these were hand coded, and you actually see stuff like that. The artifacts will present differently because they code them in a different way. But seeing emulsion on the backside like that, you'd see these in period plates where there'd be some emulsion on the back, and you go, okay, well, that was hand coded because they at the time, and we do it differently, but at the time, and actually Mark Osterman's he put out some great pictures of how he does it, which is how they did it at the time, where they poured some emulsion onto the plate while they're holding the plate, make a little puddle, and then rock it around the plate. And when you do that, and then drain off the excess. And when you drain off the excess, you'll get a little drop that often creeped underneath. This is a little different because what we do is we lay the plate down on a flat granite slab.
Yeah.
Put the emulsion down with a syringe, because I control the amount of emulsion per surface area for consistency, and then coat it with a glass rod. And sometimes, not often, we've gotten pretty good at it, but sometimes some emulsion will spill off the side of the plate and may creep underneath the glass while it's laying on the slab. And so that sort of artifact is what you get. But yeah, like you said, you can wipe it off the back, or you can keep it, as a memento.
It's interesting because then people talk about pouring plates, don't they? And that's that process that you described where people literally have the chemical and the emulsion, and they pour it on and jib it around. Whereas what you're doing is more similar to the way that people coat papers for like platinum palladium printing with a rod.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing, of course, but it is more similar to that than to the pouring plates, right?
And when I was making plates for myself, I poured them, and it was always a mess, although I was getting better at it. But what I found was that when I poured off the excess, I wasn't getting consistent emulsion thickness from plate to plate, which is fine if you're making them for yourself, but obviously can't have that for a product that professionals rely on. And so I switched techniques and I went with the coating rod. It's like I said, it's similar to how you coat paper, but not quite the same, because I figured if I ever got to the point where I needed to get away from hand coating and automate it on a production line, which I've since decided I'm not going to do. I wanted to coat them in a similar method that I would on a machine, which would be like having them run on a conveyor belt underneath emulsion that's dripping down, and then having a fixed rod down just right after that sort of spreads it out.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, like I said, I'm not going to do that. And the coating rod help with the consistency first by, establishing exactly how much emulsion each size plate gets. And then what I found over coating tens of thousands of plates is that you can get really fast with it. So like, and Amelia is even faster. So a typical jar of emulsion, which what allows us to coat like at least 64 by 5 plates in less than an hour. And that's like that's coating a plate a minute. And the way using the rod allows that, I think that was key to getting that speed up, because you have to do that. I have to keep up.
Yeah.
When I was doing it by myself, I was coating plates until like 2 a.m. and then going to sleep and waking up at 5 a.m. to start my day. And so
it's pretty full on. I mean, do the guys who work with you, do they kind of get as much of it? I mean, you obviously get a buzz. You obviously get a buzz from this. It's something which it ticks a lot of boxes for yourself in terms of the engineering stuff, the sciencey stuff, the artistic and creative stuff. Do the guys who work for you, do they get a buzz? Do they, knowing that there's, tens of thousands of photographs which have been made with something that they've done, which it's just that there's nobody really else in the world. There isn't anybody else in the world doing this, right?
Yeah, I think they appreciate the fact that it's something new and unique, but teenagers being who they are, their experience with other jobs is I don't think they appreciate the uniqueness of the job so much,
right,
compared to flipping burgers. Like if they went, I know one guy, the kid who preps my glass, he worked at a pizza joint, so he understands how much it can suck. No offense meant to anybody who runs a pizza joint, sure. But it's so I think he likes it. They do like the fact, because I'll get excited and I'll say, "Hey, guess what? We just got our plates used at Mount Wilson Observatory," and I get all excited. I think they latch on. It's hard not to do that as a person.
Well, you're very enthusiastic and you're very contagious with your enthusiasm as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's gonna kind of rub off, isn't it?
Yeah, right. So I know, like Amelia, who coats the plates, she likes. It kind of provides a break for her, I think, from school and stuff, where she goes into the dark room, gets set up, gets her music cranked, and coats plates. So it's. I think she's mentioned this before. It's relaxing or kind of a break from homework and stuff like that for her. I know she said that,
being a little bit of a sort of like a meditative thing, because it is. Yeah. You're in the zone. You're in the place.
Yeah, I was trying to look for the word for it, but it's very meditating, I think. Therapeutic. It's very therapeutic, I think, for her. I had every once in a while, pre-COVID, people would come by and get the nickel tour of Pictoriographica's worldwide corporate galactic headquarters here in my basement.
The basement.
And Gary Sampson came by, who's a photographer here in New Hampshire, well-known photographer. Shoots a lot of wet plates and stuff. He came by to see the thing, and Amelia was there coating, and it was funny. So he was like, was giving the spiel, and he goes, and Amelia was like, "Yeah, I like doing this and all that good stuff." And he's like, "Are you into photography? Like, do you have like an interest in photography?" And she's like, "No." He started laughing.
Classic.
It's great. It was great, but she enjoys the work. The girls who assemble the plate holders, they like doing it. I know Tim, who preps the glass. He enjoyed it. His job's probably the most boring because it's just day in it, prepping glass back and forth. And he's a senior in high school, so he's getting ready to graduate and go off to college. So he's he's in that short timer mode, if you know. So, but I think they enjoy it. I think they enjoy the uniqueness. Even if they don't appreciate it now, I know 10, 20 years down the road, I think they'll really look back and say that was pretty flipping awesome.
That was unusual. Yeah. That was different.
Definitely unusual. I tell them, I was like, nobody else in the world is doing what you guys do.
Literally nobody else in the world, which is kind of mind-blowing. Before I let you go, and thank you so much for taking the time to go through this with us today, just kind of maybe two final points that we can touch upon. I've mentioned that in the UK, that you have got more than one supplier in the UK or retailer in the UK, but Analogue Wonderland, who I use, there's another new one, perhaps in Kent or Essex, I think.
Yeah, Burley Cameras. Ross Burley reached out because he sells old cameras and accessories, and he figured it would be a good match. And
around the world, what's the way to go about it? Do people order directly from you, or do they go to these different suppliers, these different retailers?
Yeah, you can order directly from me. The one thing that sucks about that internationally is the shipping costs out of the US are just crazy. So having the retailers in places like the UK and Germany for the continental US and a new one in Hong Kong is that, I try to save people a few bucks by being able to package up a bunch of plates, send them to a retailer.
Yeah.
I give them a wholesale discount, of course, so they can make a buck. But I think in the end, it doesn't save a lot, right? But it saves a little bit, hopefully, and the turnaround time it went from placing order to having them shipped out.
Yeah. In terms of a sustainability of practice for people who want to get into using them, with you being the only kind of people can make them themselves, I guess, if they have the inclination and the facilities and all the rest of it. And there are some guys and girls who do that. But you're going to be kind of around doing this for as long as.
I'll do it. I'll do it as long as people want them.
Yeah, right. So that's amazing. And then there is some future development, which you mentioned right at the start. Maybe you could touch on that. The black glass amber type plates. Is that? Have I got that right?
Yep. So this was sort of something. You're gonna get me down a rabbit hole on this because it's kind of cool. Accidentally, again, I was down visiting Sam Heiser at New 55 when he was trying to put those out, and I brought some plates with, and he developed it in his monobath, which is a developer mixed with. It had a lot of ammonia. You get it and you open it up and it smells like ammonia.
Right.
And when we developed the plate, instead of getting a negative with the silver being black like you'd expect, it was a very light toned, like a tan, very light tan colored grain. And we were like, what the hell did we screw up? Did we not fix it correctly or something like that? Well, no, that's how it does it. And I kind of filed that away. And at some point, somebody asked me, like several months later, said, hey, can you coat your emulsion onto tin, like the aluminum sheets that wet platers use? And I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I could try. And the answer is no, you can't, because the emulsion doesn't stick to the aluminum unless you do other things to it, which I figured out. And then sort of the puzzle piece falling into place. I was like, light tone silver off of this monobath, black tin. What if I put those together? And I did that, and it well, once again, it looked like shit. Like, I just sort of went from there. I had issues. I had a couple of people ask if I do that and say, yeah, I think I can. And would send them some examples. I never liked the consistency of the emulsion sticking. Like, most of them would end up sticking pretty well to the metal plates, but sometimes they would peel off. And so I started searching around for black glass, which is incredibly hard to find. Good black glass, not the wrinkly stuff that stained glass people use, which people have tried to put to use, which looks awful.
Right.
But but float glass that's black colored. I found a supplier, got a bunch for wet plate shooters. Say, hey, pre-order this stuff and I'll get a shipment in. That went pretty well. I used some to start developing that process. So the coat and the emulsion side is pretty easy. Finding the right developer is a hard part, and I'm working the famous format monobaths. They're hard to get. Like you order some, and I think they're still working that out. So I was trying alternative approaches. I'm working with a guy out of Australia, Lee Lira, who really took an interest in it. And you'll see on like the Dry Plate Photographers group, all the activity related to that. We're trying to tweak this monobath developer to get it finalized. I've got another shipment of black glass in. I'm going to do some final testing. I think it'll be good enough. It's going to be about managing expectations. Most people understand this is experimental. The cool thing is this is kind of a historical process, but it's not. And by that, I mean, you can go back in the literature in the 1880s, 1890s and see where people sort of work with this, but I don't think it was ever sort of figured out to the point where you can get an ambrotype that looks really, really nice. If you follow the recipes from the era, you'll get a positive on black glass or whatever, but the highlights will have like this ugly mustard look to it, which is fine, I guess. But we're trying to go for this creamy white highlights and tweaking the formulas and stuff, and being able to take advantage of advances in knowledge from that era to now has been key. And so it's kind of a historical process, but it's a new process as well. It's taking what they worked on in the past and actually getting it to work, which is kind of exciting. I'm excited about that. Say, hey,
yeah. I mean, it's a different thing, isn't it? Rather than replicating a process, you're almost sort of taking it to its logical conclusion or to its sort of perfecting that process.
Yeah, picking up where people left off at the time, because the world sort of moved on.
Yeah.
Because it was really, I think at the time was a hybrid process to try to get wet platers introduced to dry plate, a new process.
Right.
Not that photographers are stubborn in their ways at all, but yeah, it sort of filled a niche at the time, but it went away quickly because it just wasn't perfected at the time. Anyways, that's been all neat, and credit to Lee who does this as a hobby, just like us. I think you find in the film photography world, there's a lot of little cottage industries and people doing it because they love doing it, which I think is great. But anyways, so that's coming down the pipe. I am a lens designer, so on the roadmap, and my business partner, a mechanical engineer. So when you get a mechanical engineer and a lens designer together, what's going to happen. So we're working. Yeah. So,
okay. Well, it's exciting times then.
It is absolutely. So it's just trying to figure out how to, I need more time in the days.
Invent more hours in the day first, and then
right.
Carry on with everything else. That's the way to do it. Cool.
Right.
Well,
so anyways,
on that note, thank you ever so much for spending best part of an hour and a half with us today. It's super appreciated. And
it's been a pleasure, Robin.
Yeah, I'll look forward to showing you whatever comes of this project about Edward Mudge, however that kind of works out, and dealing with the archive and doing some rephotography and talking to some museums locally who've got an archive of his work, which was funded by the Victoria and Albert Museum, and kind of things like that. So we'll see where that goes. And this is an amazing starting point. So thank you so much.
Awesome. My pleasure.